Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have with us one of the most gifted musicians on the jazz scene. This gentleman has been around for over 20 years and has worked with many greats from Nancy Wilson to Jimmy Heath, Roy Hargrove, so many. I can just think of countless musicians, Ron Carter, Cedar Walton. This guy's worked with everyone. He is a trumpeter, composer, and educator. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, Mr. Jeremy Pelt. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Man, it
Looking
is
forward.
so good to have you on. Jeremy, I was interested in knowing more about your humble beginnings and your background. You've been on the scene, as I said, for about 20 years, and I understand that you're from California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you picked up the trumpet. You started playing trumpet, from what I understand, in elementary school, and you at that time you were really interested in classical music. Tell us about that, man.
Well, this is just like you said. For me, the trumpet was I gravitated towards it, and then I immediately had friends who were music geeks, and so I kind of just assimilated. I joined the ranks of all the geeks, So it was always, either listening to marching band music or classical music, but not just any classical music, anything that had, the trumpet concertos. So I'd be listening to those, and I developed an affinity for it because my mother also played quite a lot of it, going through, just everyday life. You know what I mean? Plus,
Yeah.
every Christmas we would go and see the Handel's Messiah, and that was always a treat for me. So I was really had gravitated towards it.
Yeah. So once you got into high school, you kind of switched and started getting into jazz a little bit, huh?
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
what was the turning point for you, or what made you decide to go in that direction, Jeremy?
Well, I'll tell you what. High school at that point, and I always make it a point to kind of bring this up, just because it occurred for different people at different times, and different grade levels. So, in California, high school began at 10th grade. And
Hmm.
10th grade for me was, so junior high school was 7th to ninth, and then high school was 10th to 12th, right? And
Yeah.
so as I was leaving junior high school, which was a separate school that did have an orchestra, that I was in a full orchestra, I thought that I would be continuing that in the high school. And so when we went to go register for the high school, uh, I asked the registrar, I said, "Do you guys have an orchestra?" And they were like, "No, we don't have an orchestra, but we have a good jazz band." And I
Hmm.
said, "Okay." And it just so happened that the instructor was, reporting to the office at that same moment. And here's our jazz teacher, Mr. Magruder. And I met Mr. Magruder, and he was this old, very hip white guy. You know what I mean? He's just, all the gray hairs, everything. I mean, he'd been around. He grew up next to, he grew up with Horace Silver, and played with Don
Hmm.
Ellis and all these guys. So, and obviously I didn't know who none of these people were, but I mean,
Right.
years studying with him, then I find out. But he was just like, "Oh, okay," he was just happy to meet me, and we'll see you next year. And that was September of '91, and that's when Miles Davis died, right?
That's
So
right. Did
as
you ever did you get to see
I
Miles as a young age? Did
I
you
didn't
go?
I didn't. Um, so as I went into it was actually that day.
Oh
That's what it was. It
wow.
was the day that Miles Davis died. Then jazz band started up, and one of the guys. So I was already in jazz band, right? And then one of the upperclassmen come in and say, "Well, I think we should play So What uh, in honor of Miles Davis." And you know, he said, "All right, cool, we're gonna do that." And everybody gets So What out. So we go into the folders and we get So What out, and I'm just reading the music. I think there might be two other trumpet players.
Yeah.
And as soon as we finish the chart, then he starts pointing. That's what he used to have this big podium, and he'd sit on the podium, and he'd point to different people. And when he pointed, then they'd start playing, and it wasn't any music. I'm trying to follow along with what they're playing by looking at my music to see, because I'm lost. I'm like, wait, what's he doing? What
Right.
I don't see that here. What's he doing? And then after the piece was over, then I said, "Mr. McGrew, where were they at?" He said, "Oh no, they were playing a solo. They were improvising."
Hmm.
Oh. And so I think what had happened was right after high school, right after school, rather, that day, as I was walking back home, I went to the local record store and I looked for. I was always one to do my due diligence, right? So
Yeah.
I looked for Miles Davis. So what? And I didn't, I mean, you remember how those CD bins used to have, the CDs used to be this big with all
That's
the
right.
extra
Long
cardboard that you
cord.
didn't. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I looked through the bin and I just found the first Miles Davis thing that had "So What" on it, which wasn't kind of blue. And I picked it up, and actually it was a tape. So it was a tape in this big long plastic thing. I took the tape and I said, "All right, this has "So What." It was Miles live at Carnegie Hall,
Oh, that's
1961,
a great one. Yeah.
and that was my first jazz record. And I got that, and I got back home and I put that on, and I was completely blown away. And that was the moment. Mind you, my mother had been playing. She played jazz, and so did my grandmother, but it wasn't on. I mean, she played all the singers.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
one CD, I mean, so if you're gonna listen to Billie Holiday, which was my mother's favorite, I definitely heard Trumpet because Charlie Shavers was on a lot of that. Um, and so I heard him, but it didn't click to me. It didn't really click until she started playing Dinah Washington, and she played the CD called Dinah Jams,
Yeah.
and that CD had Clifford Brown, Maynard Ferguson, and Clark Terry. And even then, I remember doing that, but I was less enthused about it because whenever she played her records, it meant that I had to clean the house. So I wasn't necessarily into that.
Right.
But
Right.
when I heard the Miles Davis, after I think there's a thing about spending your own money, and this is something that you wanted to do,
Right.
and
Right.
so when you get it, and I got the CD or the tape, and I just wore that out. It was completely magical, and it didn't take very long at all. It was like that, instantaneous.
That's beautiful, man. So after high school, man, you go to Berklee College of
Hmm.
Music. Now I understand that when you were in Berkeley, man, during the day you were focused on film scores, man.
Hmm.
That's what you wanted to do, and at night, I guess you'd go out, and you just would play. But tell me what that experience was like, man. And during that time period, going to Berkeley, what did you get more than anything out of that, going to school, studying there?
Well, there was a sense of community. I mean, so and people that were just as nerdy as you were,
Right, right.
and into whatever there was. So I mean, there was a few things. There was number one, I was coming from, the Santa Monica area of California,
Mm,
and it was, I was kind of isolated in the fact that there weren't many other people that were into the music, not even in my jazz band. There's another cat that's starting to really come into his own, and he's my age, and we were in the same class. He's on the West Coast. He's remarkable because he was a drum player, and then he just decided he wanted to play piano, and I was there for when he did the switch, and now he's doing all types of Gene Harris stuff and whatnot. His name is Robert Turner. He's out in
okay.
in Los Angeles, but outside of that, there was nobody that had that same kind of interest. So I was always self-interested, and pursuing it. So going back to Boston, going or just going to college, first of all, gave me an experience of just having people that were my age around me all the time.
Mm,
Because it was just me and my sister. My sister's 11 years older than me, so it's just me. So now I have other people that are my age that are really into the music and that I consider to really be kind of family like, and they were all they were black.
yeah,
you
yeah.
know that's another portion to it too. So you had I was just you just there was just all of a sudden this kind of community that I embraced immediately. And then as far as the studying was concerned, and that's just I think that kind of goes along with anybody just going away to college, right? But then the study of music was film scoring was something that was the key impetus for me to go to Berkeley because I was very much into it. I would go to the movies by myself all the time, and I would be listening to film scores all the
Yeah.
time. I remember one of my favorite film scores still to this day is Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola
Mm,
version. And I remember going to the movie theater 3 times in a week when that movie first came out. 3 times in a week just for the score, And then I would go and buy like most kids today, and they go and buy Drake or whoever. I was going and buying like scores, and not like the soundtrack to the movie, but the actual score to the movie,
yeah,
and just wearing those out. So I'd listen with the same fervor as I was listening to Miles Davis, the film score. So that was the real draw about being at Berklee at that time. And then yeah, I also knew that I wanted to have this kind of dual existence of doing film scoring and playing. And so there
yeah,
was a club that was right down the street called Wally's. And anybody who's anybody that was in Berkeley or at NEC or any in the Boston area as a student that was serious about music went down to Wally's.
yeah,
And even that's where, the cats that would come back in town, like Roy, any jazz cat that would come in town and they were playing at Scullers or Regatta Bar or wherever, they would always come down to Wally's. So that's where I met a lot of them, was at Wally's. They come and sit in, and it would just be, this place would be packed. It was always packed. You had to fight to get to the front, and it was just always an electric kind of vibe. Like, oh man, we about to lay some music down. And it was a real exciting period.
yeah, man. You're honing your skills playing with a lot of these masters now. I guess after that, you make the move to New York, Jeremy.
Hmm.
And not long after that, man, you get your first professional gig playing with the Mingus Big Band, man. How did that come about?
Hmm. That came about. So I moved to New York in '98, in August of '98,
Hmm.
and um, what happened essentially was I started going to the jam sessions, and there was this one session in particular called at a club called Cleopatra's Needle that sadly closed down
Hmm.
last year, I believe, and Philip Harper, who was, kind of like one of the trumpet players that I kind of looked up to of the young lions um, at that particular point as a teenager was Roy, was Terrence Blanchard, and it
Yeah,
was Philip Harper. So I
yeah.
was big fans of all of them. And I remember Philip was running the session, and I was like, "Oh wow, man, Philip, the Harper brothers." And I'd go and hum all these songs to him, like, "You remember this?" I was that guy, and Philip recognized my talent, and he started having me come down to the Mingus band when it was at its original stomping grounds at the Fez,
Yeah,
um, and I would go down there, and he would introduce me to Sue every week and have me sit in so she could hear me. And then eventually she started calling me.
that's beautiful, man. Yeah, you speaking of big bands, you just mentioned Roy. You were in his big
Hmm.
band as well too. Roy,
Sure.
God rest his soul, man. He left us so soon. A great musician, great person, and
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of. I'm sure you were exposed to so much at that time and all around these musicians. One of the things that was incredible, and I think Jeremy, the first time I heard you, I said, "Man, who is this guy, Jeremy Pelt?" I picked up a Wayne Shorter's album. I think it's called Allegria or something like that. And I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm listening to this, and I says, "Man, this is nice." And that's when I saw you for the first time, and I liked your sound, man, and I started checking you out. And you also
Hmm.
played with man. How'd you end up playing with Nancy Wilson, man? That's another one that got me.
Oh, that came about because Todd Barkin, who was also the person that kind of brokered that meeting to with the Wayne Shorter thing,
Yeah,
introduced me to the producer of that date. But in particular, with Nancy Wilson, she was coming to town and she was doing a show at the Met, and it was just Todd was like, "Hey, listen, why don't you put Pelt on it?" Because she was already using Vincent Herring,
yeah,
and me and Vincent were tight because of the Mingus band. So I mean,
right.
that's how that kind of came about.
Wow.
And so I got up on that gig.
Yeah, yeah. And also, a lot of man, incredible musicians you play with. When I was looking into your background, another one of my favorites, who's no longer with us, is pianist Cedar Walton. Another
Oh
great
yeah.
musicians, man.
Oh.
What is it like? Let me ask you this: And Jimmy Heath also, I was about to mention him, man. When you're working with giants like that, I mean, are you initially, Jeremy, when you meet them, are you awestruck like, man, this is Jimmy Heath? Or are you just sort of like, okay, my skills are together, I'm ready, let's do this? I mean, how do you approach that when you come across or meet a giant like that, for the first time?
I don't know that I was ever, uh, and this is, I don't know how this will come across. I don't know that I was ever kind of like shell shocked or starstruck
Yeah,
in that sense. Except for very, very few, like I think maybe with Freddie,
yeah,
with Freddie Hubbard, that's when but that was when I was in college. Not that it matters because he's still Freddie Hubbard, but I think with those cats in particular, with everybody that you mentioned,
yeah,
I was, I was always very even tempered, not tempered, but just even like killed. I wasn't like gonna be like, oh my goodness. But at the same time, that was how I was projecting on the outside. And the inside, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so blessed. And I really did take that to heart anytime that they called me.
yeah,
Anytime that they called me. I mean, I've got things that I hold near and dear to me that I can't share, not for any scandalous reasons, but just something just to carry with me to the day I die about, you
yeah,
know, pieces of advice and things that they've said to me, that have really helped me out. And so I've always, first and foremost, just considered myself extremely fortunate to be in their favor whenever they did call, and ask me to do things. And yeah, so to your point also, there was a certain assuredness that I had. I knew I was definitely prepared
yeah,
to play with them when they called. So I never felt like, oh my goodness, am I gonna, I never felt nervous in that sense of like, oh, what if I mess up? Because that was never in my kind of vocabulary, my way of thinking. I mean, this is what I've been practicing for. And I was a student of the music to an extent to where I knew it,
yeah,
all their music very well. So I was, if anything, I was hyper prepared. So you call me, I'm gonna be on it. I mean, that's how I got with the Lewis Hayes and Cannonball Adderley thing.
yeah,
Was because Vincent Lewis had another trumpet player that he wanted to use, and Vincent wanted to use me. And so he said, "Well, listen, Lou, why don't we set up this session so you can hear my trumpet player?" And he brought me, and as soon as Lewis heard me, he said, "You got it." And I mean, we basically just went down all the Cannonball Alley songs, of which I knew years before. So it wasn't any type of thing where I was underprepared and like, oh, let me get this music. No, I was like, let's roll. I'm
yeah.
with you. I'm down. You know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I said, that's the key, man. You were prepared, and I guess through all your
Yeah.
training and being a student of the music, it's like, hey, that's Jimmy Heath, but I'm ready. I was also going to
Hmm.
ask you, Jeremy, another great bass player who you've worked with. You've done, I guess, a few recordings with him, and I had him on the show. Oh gosh, maybe a month and a half ago. Lonnie Plaxico,
Hmm.
real good guy. I like your stuff with him, man. And some other people, of course. You played with Robbie Coltrane, and even the great bassist Ron Carter. So
Hmm.
many important musicians you work with. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, you like to travel to Paris, man. You like to go to Paris quite a bit. Now, you told an interesting
Hmm.
story, man, that I love. You said, every time when I'm in Paris, man, I like to visit museums. You talking about one in particular. You said that people know me real well there. When I have downtime, I like to check this place out. And I love how you talked about how you commissioned to write this piece. And you talked about the Rodin suite. And of course, the
Yeah.
recording that you put out, Jeremy Pelt, the artist. I love that, man. That 5-piece suite. That is beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Just some great
Thanks.
writing. And what is it about Paris, man, that draws you? Is it just something about the place or the museums in particular that really, really gets you? Because it's almost like, you kind of said when you were there, it's just something, I guess maybe it opens you up or your imagination, you're focused on some of these pieces or, the work of some of these artists, and you're like, wow, you know? And did that help you in your creative process as far as your writing is concerned?
Well, I'll say this. Especially it's like the old saying goes, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right?
Yeah,
And we now have not been able to travel for what it seems like an eternity for somebody like me
Yeah.
who's used to going back and forth to Europe 3 or 4 times a year. Um, so when I think about it, especially on those terms, I think one of the things that I get, um, I guess, very inspired by is just being in a different environment altogether. So
Mm,
whether it's Paris or whether it's Prague, whether it's lots of different cities are beautiful, and yeah. So I just I and because I love museums and being in a space where I could look and admire art, I do feel certain inspirations from places that I go all the time. Now, with that said, that particular suite, the Rodin suite, was something that was bound to happen, and it was just
yeah.
it had to happen, and I was luckily presented with an opportunity to realize it, both from a financial point of view and well, yeah, mainly from a financial point of view, being able to go. That was like the first time I'd actually ever traveled to anywhere for a period of time where I wasn't playing my trumpet. You know what I mean? So I was pretty much just a resident there for 2 weeks, really going to take in the artwork. But um, it I chose it because, um, and this is no BS. Paris is full of museums, right? It's full of museums, and so going there, every time I go there, I'm always going to different museums and checking out new exhibits. But something about the layout of the Rodin Museum is so amazing to me, and
Mhm.
also the history of the museum as well, being that he lived there, lent itself to the whole narrative of the home of the museum itself. So when I go there and I walk around the garden and I see all those works of art, it does something. It takes me to a whole other place, and it's some place that I never get tired of. So if I'm going to Paris 3 times a year, that also means I'm going to the Rodin Museum 3 times a year.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Like I said, it just that recording is awesome. And speaking of recordings, man, you have over 10 recordings out. You have another one coming out in February.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
look forward to hearing that. And also,
this will be my 18th.
that's incredible, man. 18? Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. You know,
yeah.
that's a large outing for someone, of your age. Because like I said, you've been around for roughly 20 years. So yeah, that's quite a bit. And also you have a book coming out, man, about
I
these
do.
interviews that you're doing with these jazz musicians, like
Hmm.
Wynton Marsalis and some of these cats, man. Tell us about
Hmm.
that.
So, it's this is another kind of pet project of mine, right? Like the Rodin, but now Uh, what I had in mind was back in 2018, as a matter of fact, which is kind of run, I guess, parallel to when I was also realizing what I was going to do with the artwork, right, with the Rodin.
Yeah.
At the end of 2018, I was at home going online, uh, web surfing, and I stumbled on this interview of Art Taylor,
Mm,
um, and it was given by another great drummer named Warren Smith at the Schomburg Center here in Harlem, and it was just a beautiful interview that lasted for 2 hours, and it's just about Art Taylor's life and his perspective on things, and he even played a little bit and demonstrated, and it was just great. And I'm a frustrated drummer. Not a lot of people know that I'm a frustrated bassist and a
right.
frustrated drummer, but I really do love the drums. So I mean, I think that day I was just perusing through the internet looking for like different people like Art Blakey and Philly Joe and all these interviews. Um, and I was reminded watching that Art Taylor wrote one of my favorite books, which is Notes and Tones, where he did musician to musician interviews. That was
Mhm.
something that I always read all throughout college, and I was like, man, this is great. And then now to see Warren interviewing him, it really set the spark off in my mind. I was like, you know what? What if I think, well, first of all, I did the same thing that a lot of people did, which is, man, somebody should interview some cats in this generation. So it starts with somebody
Yeah,
should, and that's what it was all. Somebody should do this, and then I said, well, why can't that be me? And so and because I knew a lot of these people, because as you noted, I played with them. So,
yeah,
I called Warren, who was the first person I called, and I said, I was very inspired by this interview that you did, and I want to do the same thing with you. I want to come to your house. This was still, obviously pre-COVID. I want to come to your house and ask you some questions, and he let me do it. And from there, I was like, look, I what I originally set out to do was to interview as many of the elders in the music, the elder soldiers, as a matter of fact, in the music, as what I call the soldiers, even though
yeah,
we're all soldiers, but there's some that didn't necessarily get as much ink as others. So I wasn't necessarily thinking like, yeah, I'm gonna go for Ron Carter, and but even though everybody's worthy of an interview, but I wanted to get people that didn't necessarily do too many. So I got Warren Smith, and I got Paul West. I got everybody's story. I got Bertha Hope, and
oh,
then
Elmo's
I
wife, widow, wow.
yeah, and then I started thinking, I was on the road with Kenny Barron,
Oh yeah.
and I said this would be stupid if I'm gonna be here in this hotel with him for 2 days and not ask him. So I got Kenny, and then I was gonna be doing some stuff with George Cables. I got George, so I started getting in. I was like, okay, and Lewis, I've been in Lewis's band for 20 years. Yeah, so let me get Lewis. So I started doing that, and then I started thinking about, well, now let me get a younger generation of people. So then it was the Lonnie Plaxicos, then it was the Lewis Nashes, Peter Washingtons, and that generation.
Yeah,
And then I said, well, you know what? Now, how about my generation, or maybe the next generation for me. So I mean, sadly, Roy is not with us anymore. But I started talking to like Justin Robinson, JD Allen, and people that were around just before I was there. And then I started talking to people in my generation, and it kind of evolved into a situation to where I got over 35 hours of interviews,
man, that's incredible. Wow.
and so it's enough to where I could start releasing things in volumes. So this first one is going to be the volume one. It's 15 interviews,
Mm,
and it boasts names like you said, Wynton Marsalis, and in this particular volume is going to be Paul West, Renee Marie, Lewis Nash, Wynton Marsalis, Bertha Hope, Terry Lynn Carrington, J.D. Allen, Ambrose Akinmusiri, Justin Robinson. Uh, who else? I mean, there's a few more that's escaped me right
that's
now,
an
but
impressive list, Jeremy. That's an
you
impressive
know,
list, man. I look forward
and
to it. I'll,
and
I'll be the first
and
in
at,
line to buy it.
and then at the same time, I also was like, okay, so for my next record, what I wanted to do is I wanted to score the some of the sound bites of the interviews, the more poignant interviews that I did. So it was always in my mind to create this companion piece to it. So the record, which I release a record every year, was definitely going to come out, but then the book was going to be as a companion to that. Um, and so that's how that works. So the CD, which has the same title, both of them are called Grio. The
Yeah,
CD is called Grio. This is important. Why? Whereas the book is just called Grio. But the CD is essentially some sound bites from some of the interviews, even with Larry Willis and Harold Mayburn, who are sadly no longer with us,
yeah.
JD, Bertha, Renee Marie, Ambrose, and just sound bites. And then I scored music to that. So that's what's coming out.
Exciting, man. Like I said, I look forward to it. And that's February, right?
That's February 12th. Yes.
Now, I want to do something with you, man. I know you being a trumpet aficionado. I want to play a little
Mm,
word association game with you. I'm going to name some trumpet players, and I want you just to say the first thing that comes to your mind, man. There's no right or wrong answer. Okay?
okay.
All right, first name, Fats Navarra.
inventive,
Yeah.
inventive. You know, does it have to just be one word, or you want me
No,
to have a
brother.
phrase?
No, you
Oh,
say whatever you want, man.
oh man, Fats Navarro is just he's one of the architects
Yeah.
of this music. It's like when you hear people say something like, "Yeah, the architect of this music," you kind of take it for granted what the word means, but um, in terms of building ideas and phrases, that's what an architect means to me in terms of how he puts his lines together so thoughtfully and very daring, and they make so much sense, and it's really always something very inspiring to hear.
Yeah. Next name, Dizzy Gillespie.
The chief architect, right? Um, or one of them. You know, he's kind of like the CEO of as far
Right.
as bebop is concerned. Exactly the same type of thing, except that you add more rhythm to his component. Um, because everything, and I just, it's funny that you should mention his name because I just did an interview yesterday with somebody just purely on Dizzy Gillespie. And the thing about Dizzy is that he is, his name should be, or for me at least, is synonymous with rhythm. Um, I likened it to watching this is years ago. I think it was called "This Is It." Michael Jackson. It was
Oh,
like the
yeah.
last documentary before when he died. It came out, and it was a concert film, but it was a backstage type of thing, right? And what struck me about Michael was that he couldn't sit still, right? So when he's talking to his band members or whoever, he's always like popping, in
Right.
some
Right.
type of way. He's like,
Right.
and he's doing all this, and that's him. He's not trying to, put on a show. That's
Right.
just him, and that's the way I think about Dizzy. So anything that he's playing, or when he's talking, it's all rhythm. It's pure rhythm.
Yeah. Yeah. Next name, Clifford Brown.
Clifford Brown, I think these are all you're just getting it all in this. It's style and again inventiveness. That's where there's a great picture of Clifford Brown who was maybe about what 7 years younger than Fats Navarro, but I don't know exactly
And that was
what
his
year the
idol,
picture
too.
was in. Of course, that's what I was gonna say. There's a picture of them shaking hands and talking and whatnot,
Hmm.
and you just tell you could see the admiration in Clifford's eyes, and you could see that he's the most logical kind of person to carry on the tradition from Fats.
Yeah. Yeah. Next name, Booker Little.
Yeah. Now Booker Little for me is a personal idol. I mean, for me, Booker was like opening up the floodgates, to other possibilities, and Booker was himself very uh, interested in dissonances, and so to me, that is a tip of the hat to Dizzy Gillespie, who not a lot of people talk about the kind of dissonances that Dizzy would play
Mm.
in his lines. People don't realize that a lot of times, and in his way, Booker had the same type of thing, to where there would be certain ideas that were conflicting in a tonal sense, that were still very related to the harmony, and he he precise. Remember when I first met Hub, Hub was like, oh, Booker was like a machine, he's like,
Yeah.
and he was. I mean, so everything he played on this grid, man, he was just making it. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was it was just daring. Yeah.
Next name, Freddie Hubbard. As we just mentioned, we talked about him a little.
Freddie, what he did was he took Booker's shit and made it slick, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freddie would have told you that. I mean, anybody that could make Freddie go home on the train crying is a personal hero to anybody, right? But yeah, Freddie just just really took things that Clifford was doing, the things that Miles was doing, things that Booker was doing, and just really made it even slicker than it was,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
that was his gift, was just really very harmonically precise, very technically precise, but also very just slick with it's kind of like listening to, you know, Luther Vandross on the trumpet or something like that. Just, smooth,
Yeah. Yeah. Next name, Lee Morgan.
See, now Lee Morgan was the ultimate, man.
Yeah.
Lee Morgan was what I would call resilient. The thing is this: if I discard, like, just shed the fanboy in me about all these cats, but in particular about somebody like Lee Morgan, I would easily say that he wasn't necessarily always consistent, especially towards mid 60s on. And that there was a lot of events in his life that took place to why that was. But even when he wasn't as on, you still weren't going to get Lee.
Yeah.
And Freddie said that many times. Freddie said, no matter how much stuff I played, Lee would come back and play that one line that would make everybody, oh, and that's really the true sign,
Yeah.
because that just lets you know that his spirit transcended the horn in such a way that he didn't necessarily have to play all this to get to your heart. You know what I mean? A lot of people like to hear high and fast and whatnot, and that's cool. But so if he just plays that one phrase, you get messed up right away. You
Yeah.
know,
What about Woody Shaw?
what he saw was just, it's like you put on the coat, the laboratory coat, and you go in and you really just start, you know, putting together some things. Woody Shaw was exactly inventive, and he was like, in his, I mean, first of all, a lot of people, and I remember Steve Teray pulled my coat to this many years ago. He said, man, a lot of times people think that Woody was, really, coming out of Freddie, but Woody was really coming out of Lee. And that made all the sense in the world. As soon as he said it, then it opened things up for me. I was like, oh, you're right. I could hear it. And so he took that along with Freddie, but his voice was so very vibrant, on just the sound
Yeah.
and his voice. It was almost like he's talking to you. You know what I mean? Deep, boo-dee, boo-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee,
Yeah.
dee-dee-doo-dee, deep, boo-doo-dee-dee-dee-dee. I mean, that's some slick stuff right there. And then let's not even get into, when he wanted to really turn the fire on, then it was a different story then. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Last but not least, Miles Davis.
Miles is, like it's been said many times before, is the sorcerer.
Yeah.
Miles was the person that you didn't dare, even though some did. Like, funny thing is the relationship that Freddie and Miles Davis had, because Freddie really idolized Miles, but Freddie was still gonna be Freddie about
Right.
it.
Right.
But
Right.
he really, what he wanted more than anything was that acceptance from Miles in particular. That was Freddie. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's what Freddie really wanted. And Miles always knew that, and he held that card closest to his wrist, like, you're not gonna get it. You know, that's just an aside. I'll say that with Miles, Miles was the one cat that you never really challenged in a certain type of way because you couldn't ever beat him. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
he was so far above a lot of the pyrotechnique and things that would happen. Like, they would have these trumpet battles. Even his contemporaries like Kenny Dorham and all these cats that will easily play some harmony on Miles, even though you can't sleep on Miles because Miles, he was so slick in how he arrived at his ideas that if you weren't hip, you wouldn't realize. And that's the problem, is that a lot of people, a lot of trumpet players that you want to pit him against, like, well, what about Woody, or what about Lee, or when you talk about in relation to Miles, the thing is that there's a lot of cats that would be able to play some notes and really get into some things, some nice ideas that Miles wasn't doing in that same way. But Miles had a way of really just playing the notes that counted. You know what I mean?
exactly.
And and when he did that, you kind of were reduced to feeling like you were, as I used to say back in the day, in knee pants. You know what I mean? You was like,
Yeah,
okay, I'm still a little boy, because I mean, you're not he's not going to be forced to go on to that level of having to play all this. He already did all that in the 40s. You
yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean? When he had to, when he was sitting next to people that, when this was before he was Miles Davis. So when he's sitting next to Fats Navarro and Dizzy Gillespie in the same section, and they trading, you know, yeah, he had to rise to the occasion. And there were times that he did. A lot of times people sleep on Miles Davis and how technically proficient he was, and how together he was in his lines on bebop. People don't like to, if you talk about Fast Navarro on beat and Dizzy, then you kind of discount Miles because he wasn't doing the same types of things. But the thing is, he was. If you listen to Miles in Paris in 1949 and all these, oh man, he's extremely in there.
Did you ever, Jeremy, hear that story that happened between him and Clifford Brown?
Which one? I've heard
There,
that one.
well, there was one when I talked to a Jimmy Heath, a number of
Mm,
years ago, and he told me when Clifford was around, Miles didn't play. But there's another story. Did you hear? And this is a true story with Max Roach and Clifford Brown. They were on stage playing. They said the stage was on fire. Clifford lit it up. So Miles Davis came walking in, asked Clifford, "Could I borrow your horn?" and took his
mm,
mouthpiece and put it in Clifford's and played the most beautiful version of My Funny Valentine. Everybody was like in tears. And Miles
mm.
gave Clifford his trumpet back, took his mouthpiece out, walked out, and left. And that's a true story, too. Some guy named Prophet Jennings confirmed it.
Oh, Prophet, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Well, look, I completely believe it. It's
You know,
what did Michelle Obama say a couple years ago? They said when they go low, you go high. I forgot what it was,
that's
but it
something
was
like that. Yeah,
it's something like that. It's like, okay, look, I'm not gonna say, if I'm in a situation where there's somebody that I know is gonna eat me up, technically, especially. And you got to see, the thing is, you got to know what your superpowers are.
right.
You know
Yeah,
what I mean? You can't be sitting next to Clifford Brown and Clifford doing all this, yeah, and you like, man, look, I ain't even gonna try to deal with that. I'm gonna go ahead and do me and bring it down right here. And that's what
yeah,
he did.
yeah, yeah. And another trumpet player Miles loved was Woody Shaw. He said, "Now, that's a trumpet player right there." He loved Woody as
Oh,
well,
he was, yeah,
as well as Freddie and Lee, all of those guys. And Freddie
he loved
Webster was
Lee,
his guy too.
of course, but Miles really loved Lee.
Yeah,
He really did. He definitely, of course, Freddie Webster, Howard McGee. There's a great, that iconic photo of Howard playing and
right.
Miles
Miles
is
is
like
looking
looking
up
at
at
him
him.
like, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, those were the cats, man, for him. So I mean, you definitely saw that, and of course, He was like by all reports, he was a baby when Dizzy was around. Even till they
Yeah.
were both, old and whatever. He was still a baby, and that lets as gruff as Miles let on. I remember seeing this interview with Bryant Gumbel, right? This is like mid '80s, something like
Oh,
that.
I know what you're talking about.
Bryant,
Yeah.
yeah, and the thing that was so beautiful to me was, Bryant was like, well, how do you pick the people in your band, and how do you, and Miles at that point, he was really, he had achieved what he really wanted, which wasn't about the money because he always had money. It was really that stature of fame. You know what I mean? And so he played into that all the time. So now he's on Today and he's talking, and he might just say anything just to get a rise. He's like, I look at the bass player's fingers and I look at how they hold it. Some things that which are very true. Like
Right, right.
if you I listen to him say it and I'm like, that is true, because if you're looking for somebody that plays, Miles was always concerned about the visual aspect of his band too, right? So I mean, when you talk to even the cats, like I know Vincent and all the cats that were there, and Daryl, I know all them cats, and that was the whole thing, was not only are you gonna be playing your ass off, but you got to look a certain type of way on
Yeah.
the stage. So he was very into that. But then Brian gets to a point where he says, well, I think he's talking about maybe the polls, the jazz critics polls or whatever,
Right.
and I can't remember the exact question, but
Mm.
Miles said, "Well, he said Dizzy loves me, you know, something like that," and that took it all the way. That was the most real thing I heard, right? Because
Yeah.
this is somebody that surpassed Dizzy in terms of fame. I'm sure money.
Oh, yeah.
At that point, he was on every festival, everything. So he's now the top cat, but he never got too big for his britches, in the sense to not sit over here and lift Dizzy's name up and be like, listen, man, I'm still Miles, but that's still Dizzy.
He always gave, yeah, you're right, man. He always gave respect. Still to this day, I've talked to musicians and they say Miles Davis may be the most important jazz musician ever. I mean, he's the only one they can think of that changed the course of music 5 times. And he's like,
Mhm.
cutting edge of everything, man. Just, Miles was just incredible. But I wanted to ask you, Jeremy, when you're home, just chilling out, just relaxing, man, you're not touring, like now because of COVID.
Mhm.
What are you listening to, man? What is Jeremy Pelt checking out? You got a little bit of something old on, some new, maybe some funk, or I'm just curious what you checking out, man.
I think it's a mishmash of a lot of different things, man. I
Yeah,
mean, uh, I'm a very much a student of especially the classics.
yeah,
So I what like, but today, let's say, or yesterday, as a matter of fact, I went on Spotify and I went on to one of those playlists to check out the new releases of jazz that were coming out.
yeah.
Ju- and I do that every once in a while, because it's important to check out not so much your competition, but what else is going on, besides your stuff. You know what I mean? So I do that, but if I'm completely honest, if what I'm listening to with any kind of regularity is, it tends to be the old stuff, and I'm just weird like that. I mean, you're talking to somebody that at least 3 to 4 times a year will legitimately sit in one spot and watch The Godfather in its
Hmm.
entirety, the whole in one sitting. You know what I mean? And this has been going on for 20 years, more than 20 years. You know what I mean? So I could recite the whole movie, and still there's sometimes where there's a question that has been unanswered for years that I finally got after the 100th time seeing the movie. So I'm like one of those type of people that is very analytical, but also listening for things that I didn't understand maybe when I was younger. I mean, that's kind of how that is. There are recordings that I listen to when I was younger that I was like, and then I listened to it with more developed ears, and I'm like, wow, this is killing,
Yeah,
And so that's why I do things like that. That's why I'm kind of into the oldies, so to speak. But yeah, then and when I'm not doing that, like I said, I'll peruse the new stuff that's happening, or certainly old R&B.
yeah.
And then also, yeah, I mean, old. Well, I could talk about the old R&B, Ohio players and Earth, Wind and Fire and all that.
Oh
But
yeah,
I could also talk about the R&B that was from my generation, because every once in a while I like to take that walk during, down memory lane and think about, when I listen to stuff like that, it kind of takes me back to like, what was I doing when I heard this?
right.
So like when I think about, you know, Baduism, Erica Badu's first CD, I'm like, I remember that was my third year in college. I remember seeing that my roommate came back and he was excited. He said, "Yo, you got to check this out. She's kind of like Billie Holiday, but on R&B." And I remember we put that on, and I mean, that was just that whole CD became a soundtrack to my whole life.
Also,
You know what I
Lauryn
mean?
Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. That
Lauren
was
Hill,
another one.
exactly. That was enough. That was So I kind of separate things, because I mean, like with Eric Badu, that was still part of my coming into my own, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
So I mean, I was still in college, whereas I was out of college by the time Miseducation. If you talk about Lauryn Hill, I mean, for me, college again. But now we're talking about the Fugees. So I
yeah,
mean, I remember, those times where it's like, oh, I remember when I was doing this in college, or this and that, or if I'm listening to like Tony, or I remember, when I was doing this in high school, so certain things kind of take me to a different place, Tevin Campbell,
yeah.
I remember when this jam came on, so mint condition, those type of things that take me completely back to a certain time.
Man, I love your group, man. I've been checking out your bands, especially the last couple of years. I love your vibe player, that lady from Taiwan. Was it Chung Chong Lu
Mm,
or something like that?
Chain Lu.
She's fantastic, man. And I know she just did her debut recording. What was it, last year, whatever? And I know
Hmm.
that you're on it. She was talking about you. And one of my favorite cuts, man, is the way you guys do that tune, Invitation. You were
Hmm.
rocking on that one. I like that tune. But no, she's a fantastic artist, man, and definitely
Hmm.
a force to be reckoned with. I've had some vibe players on, like your friend Warren Wolf and Stefan
Yeah,
Harris. They've both been on too.
sure.
But I love the stuff you've done with Warren. But man, just all
Yeah.
of your music. You're one of my favorite musicians, man. And I'm just thankful that you came on Jazz Talk today just to kick it with me for a little bit. And
Oh
hopefully I'll
man,
get a chance to see
fun.
you soon, man, once this is over. I missed you because you mentioned Todd Barkin. Keystone
Hmm.
Corner is just 15, 20 minutes from me. So I'm there all the time. And I think you guys were there, what, last year or something, and I
I
missed
was,
you.
I, well, what's funny is that you might get an opportunity soon, because I was just talking to Warren this morning, and he's like, "Yeah,
Ah,
man, I'm talking to Todd." He said, "I'm talking to Todd about bringing you back out here, man. We're gonna
that'd
do
be
this."
nice, man. It'd be so good to
So
see because yeah,
that'd be great.
he's had everybody there. Ron Carter, Greg Osby's been there. He's got Dee Dee
Hmm.
Bridgewater coming soon, some other cats. But yeah, please come back, man. It'd be fantastic to see
Yeah,
you.
man.
Hang on, I'm about to close out the show. Well,
Uh,
you've heard it from the great Jeremy Pelt. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.